G'day, my name's Alan Gamble. Welcome to another episode of Aussie Box Office Charts, Weekend 21, where we have a new Star Wars movie opening and a massive second week for Obsession. Let's dive into this weekend's numbers. So first of all, Star Wars, The Mandalorian and Grogu does open at number 1 with $6.4 million. That's the fourth highest opening of 2026, so it's not a total wipeout. If you want my thoughts in a quick cat meme, here it is. If you want a good movie, you're in for a bad time. If you like cute and silly things, you'll have an okay time. If you've seen all the Star Wars side content, Rebels, Clone Wars, the games, and you think Dave Filoni is the only guy that looks cool in a cowboy hat, you will have a great time. I am not that into it. I have seen all the side content, but that wasn't enough to make me overlook the just kind of meh nature of the movie. It's not atrocious, but it's also didn't do much to get me excited either. And I have the full breakdown of the Aussie Star Wars box office performance. It took a lot of digging, but I've got all those numbers after the top 10, and we'll dive in and see how Mandalorian and Grogu stack up. Michael stays at number 2 in its 5th week of release, dropping just 35% with another $3 million for a current total of $37.1 million. Crazy good numbers for that as well. The Devil Wears Prada 2 drops down to number 3 with another $2.4 million. Its 4th week in release, dropping 49% for a current total of $36.2 million. Obsession moves up to number 4 with $1.6 million in its 2nd week of release. That is a plus 101% off its last week opening weekend. We are brought in around $800,000 for a current total of $2.9 million plus 100%. That is crazy good as a second week. That is similar to what we saw with Sinners, but what that screams is crazy good word of mouth. A whole bunch of people went and saw it opening weekend and they told everyone, oh my god, you got to go see Obsession. So if you're a horror fan, go check that out. And rounding out the top 5 is The Sheep Detectives with another $1 million, holding nicely in its 3rd week of release, dropping just 26% for a current total of $5.2 million. Moving on to 6 through 10, Drishyam 3 opens with $700,000, which is a Malayalam language crime thriller out of India, the 3rd in the series that started back in 2013. Good numbers for an Indian release there. At number 7, we have Passenger with $500,000. It's opening. It looks like it did okay for a little road trip horror, but it couldn't compete with Obsession finding its legs. Dropping down to number 8 is Mortal Kombat 2 in its 3rd week of release, dropping 64% for another $400,000 for a current total of $4.6 million. Project Hail Mary down at number 9 with another $200,000. Its 10th week in release, dropping 56% for a current total of $38.7 million. And rounding out the top 10, Super Mario Galaxy Movie holding on with its 8th week of release with another $185,000, dropping 43% for a current total of $38.9 million. That is the current highest grossing movie of 2026 so far. So, as I said, not all is lost for The Mandalorian and Grogu. It is not a total disaster. It is the 4th highest opening movie of 2026. It won't be there by the end of the year, but for now, it knocked Project Hail Mary down to number 5 with its $6.1 million, and that drops Wuthering Heights out of the top 5 openings of 2026 with its $6 million. For Mandalorian and Grogu enters at number 4 with $6.4 million. The top 3 remain The Devil Wears Prada 2, The Super Mario Galaxy Movie, and Michael. So, The Mandalorian and Grogu. Let's talk all things Star Wars in the Australian box office. First up, opening weekend at the Australian box office for every Star Wars movie that released theatrically in Australia. I'm going right back to 1977. Yes, I found 1977 Aussie box office numbers. It opened to $85,000. Now, you have to understand, back in the 70s and 80s, the release structure was very different in Australia. It would open in one cinema, in one city, in a few screens, then it would spread to a few more, and it would tour around like a stage show will. The Empire Strikes Back in 1980 opened to $164,000, and Return of the Jedi in 1983 opened to just under $400,000. Don't worry, we will adjust these in inflation, but they're still very low. In 97, we had the special editions open. where Star Wars Special Edition opened to $3 million. The Empire Strikes Back, a couple of months later, opened to $1.7 million. And then Return of the Jedi Special Edition opened to $1.3 million. You can see the diminishing returns on that, but that was the special editions from 97. Then we had 1999's The Phantom Menace that opened to $9.1 million. Episode 2 Attack of the Clones in 2002 opened to $11.9 million. And Revenge of the Sith in 2005 opened to $13.5 million. Then Star Wars was kinda done. But we did have The Clone Wars in 2008. Granted, an animated movie, so less crossover appeal. Like, a lot of people that like Star Wars weren't going to go and see an animated movie. But then, 2015, The Force Awakens opened to $27 million. That's a huge, huge opening. That's one of the biggest openings in Australia's history. Rogue One in 2016 opened to $14.7 million. Remember, our biggest opening so far this year is $11 million. The Last Jedi in 2017 opened to just over $20 million. Another huge opening. Say what you will about those movies, they brought in big money. Solo opened to $6.6 million. There's our competitor to The Mandalorian and Grogu, but it did still beat it. And then everyone's favourite, The Rise of Skywalker in 2019, opened to $17.9 million. Let's sort this high to low. So this is what it looks like in terms of how well The Mandalorian and Grogu opened compared to every other Star Wars movie. And it's not real good. The only movies that it beat were the original trilogy back in the 70s and 80s, the Clone Wars from 2008, and the special editions from 1997. Everything since then opened bigger than The Mandalorian and Grogu. So, not an overwhelming success. It's on par with Solo, but we'll see where it ends up anyway. It's got a long way to go before it finds its ground, and we'll check the totals in a second, so you've got a picture of Star Wars movies in Australia. Inflation adjusted, it looks a little bit worse, but not that much worse, to be honest. It puts it more on par with Star Wars Special Edition from 97, but not too much changes. Jumping across to total gross at the Australian box office, this is what it looks like. The Force Awakens in 2015 is the highest grossing Star Wars movie in Australia's history, bringing in a total of $94 million. Rogue One is actually the second highest grossing Star Wars movie of all time, bringing in just over $50 million. And Rise of Skywalker from 2019 sits just below that, along with The Last Jedi. And then we have our prequel series with Phantom Menace, Revenge of the Sith, and Attack of the Clones. Then we have a bit of a drop, all the way down from 30 odd mil to $16.9 million. That's where Solo ended up in 2018. That is at least where The Mandalorian and Grogu needs to get in the Aussie box office to sort of not be a complete failure. 97 Star Wars Special Edition ended up with $11.3 million, and the original Return of the Jedi ended up with a total of just over $8 million. So if we shift these around and adjust for inflation, we'll see where The Mandalorian needs to get to really look like it's okay. So when we adjust for inflation, The Mandalorian and Grogu is currently the third lowest, but it's its opening weekend. It's got to get up to $19.4 million to beat The Empire Strikes Back from 1980. $21 million is where Solo ended up adjusted for inflation, so that's kind of the ballpark of where it needs to get to. If it falls off that, I would consider it a bit of a dud. If it exceeds that and gets up to $30 million, I don't think it's going to, but if it does, that's where Return of the Jedi sits, and the original Star Wars, adjusted for inflation, brought in around $45 million. Then we have all the more modern ones that open much bigger, in a lot more cinemas, in a lot more screens, means a lot more money. But adjusted for inflation, The Force Awakens still stays at the top with an adjusted $124 million. Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, ended up with $80 million adjusted for inflation, and Rogue One comes in third. So that's Star Wars movies at the Aussie box office. We're going to keep track of The Mandalorian and Grogu as it moves up this chart, hopefully. Next week, it's got to be beating the special edition of The Empire Strikes Back. Otherwise, it's in for a bad time. Now, The Mandalorian and Grogu underperforming is exactly what Michael wants in its race versus Bohemian Rhapsody. You can see it was extending its lead, and it's maintained about par in the last week. So we're going to keep an eye on this. This is going to be a long-term picture, a long-term race. But if more big hits flop and don't do as well, people are going to go see Michael again. We're going to keep an eye on this race. Moving on to the top 10 of 2026. So the top 10 of everything released in calendar year 2026. Only one change. Nothing at the top. A Super Mario Galaxy movie, Project Hail Mary, still hold 1 and 2 at both over 38 point something million dollars. Very, very close. And 3 and 4, also extremely close, with Michael at 37.1 and The Devil Wears Prada 2 at $36.2 million. Then we've got a big gap with Wuthering Heights at just over $20 million. At number 6, Song Sung Blue with its $12.2 million, and Goat at number 7 with $11.9 million. The Magic Faraway Tree at number 8 with $10.2 million. Hoppers moves up over Mighty Supreme with its $9.8 million, and Mighty Supreme drops down to position number 10 with $9.7 million. Not a huge lot coming out this week. 28th of May, wide releases. We have Backrooms, a new horror from director Kane Parsons, starring Renate Renziv, Chiwetel Ejiofor, and Mark Duplass. Horror's getting a good year. We also have H is for Hawk, a new drama from director Philippa Lowthorpe, starring Claire Foy, Brendan Gleeson, and Lindsay Duncan. And we have Power Ballad, a new music comedy from director John Carney, starring Paul Rudd, Nick Jonas, and Peter McDonald. I might try and swing that one on the weekend if I can. And in limited release, we have Buffalo Kids, a 2022 Spanish animated movie that has been dubbed into English. English voice cast includes Alicia Weir, Gemma Arterton, and Sean Bean. Moving on to streaming releases. First up, we have Propeller One-Way Night Coach, written and directed by John Travolta as his directorial debut. It's starring Clark Shotwell, Kelly Evanston Quintet, and Ella Blue Travolta. Yep, that's his daughter. Could be really, really bad, but you can find out on May 28th on Apple TV+. We also have Star City, a new sci-fi historical fiction set in the For All Mankind universe of alternate history. This time, going back to the beginning and setting it in the eyes of the Soviet Union. Starring Rhys Ifans, Anna Maxwell Martin, and Agnes O'Casey. I can't wait for this one. It kicks off on Apple TV Plus on May 28th. In returning series, we have The Four Seasons. The Tina Fey and Coleman Domingo-led comedy series returns for its second season on May 28th on Netflix. And also returning for its second season on May 28th is A Good Girl's Guide to Murder. But unlike its season 1 that can be found on Netflix, season 2 will be releasing on Stan for reasons. And the studio executives why piracy is making a comeback. Right there. So, 4 movies watched for the theme of toxins and poisons in things, people, or places, kicking us off with a rewatch of 2008's The Hurt Locker, directed by Catherine Bigelow and starring Jeremy Renner, Anthony Mackie, and Brian Geraghty, giving us a story of an army bomb squad during the Iraq War, where a new captain joins a team replacing a fallen member, only the new captain has a much looser attitude with his job. Another movie ticked off my list of movies that I own on physical but have never logged or rewatched since I started logging movies in 2013, but also doing an unofficial, unintended Catherine Bigelow rewatch project, I guess. This one was great, very tense, gripping, although it does focus more on the Americans and less the ethics of them being there that would feature in her later movies, but it's still a great movie. Next up was the latest big Star Wars movie, Star Wars: The Mandalorian and Grogu, directed by Jon Favreau and starring Pedro Pascal, Jeremy Allen White, and Sigourney Weaver, giving us more of the Mandalorian story that had to be in a movie for some reason. I've seen it, and I'm still not sure why it was a movie, but it was. Now, I gave some of my thoughts earlier, but yeah, I just found it was kind of meh. Nothing overwhelmingly good, but nothing much terrible with it either. It was just kind of there. Filled with tropes as far as the eye can see, with pacing all over the place, and outside of the introduction sequence, there wasn't even much of a wow factor. It was cool to see Nal Hutta on the big screen, something I've, played since 2011 with the Old Republic, so that was fun. Next up was The Witch Part 2, The Other One, directed by Park Hyung-jung, starring Shin Sia, Park Yeon-bin, Seo Yeon-so, and Jin Gu. A direct follow-on from The Witch Part 1 that I watched a few weeks back, this one tells the story of another girl that wakes up in a secret laboratory with no memory, then, during her wanderings, meets another girl who takes her in. While Part 2 was not as good as Part 1, it still certainly had its moments. Granted, I think one of the issues they had with this one was bringing in and introducing way too many characters with different relationships and alliances that did get a bit confusing. But when it came to the action, zero complaints from me. Finally, it was another 2026 catch-up with 1 Mile Chapter 1, directed by Aaron Davidson, starring Ryan Philippe, Amelie Hoffrey, and Sarah Canning. Telling a very simple story of an estranged father and daughter spending some time together, only to be put under threat from a cult in an isolated forest. This one was mostly pretty forgettable, nothing you haven't seen before, but it did have some decent fight choreography, but it was a pretty stock standard movie that you've probably seen many parts of a million times before. This week's Cinechums Movie Challenge is Inspired Origins. So things that are based on TV shows, video games, books, plays, or memes, or urban legends, or anything outside other movies. So it can't be a sequel or a spin-off or a remake of another movie. Few people have kicked it off with The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, History of Violence, Battle Royale would count, Ghost World, Exit 8, Edge of Tomorrow. We've got quite a lot to choose from. Let's have a look at my shortlist. So my shortlist consists of Nausicaa, All You Need Is Kill, maybe DOA, The Sheep Detectives I might see, Street Fighter rewatch, People We Meet on Vacation, Double Dragon, Dread. We've got lots to choose from, so we'll see how we go. But that is it for me this week. Tune in next week. We're going to have a bit of a quieter weekend myself, but I might try and catch up on things I didn't. So I might try and catch The Sheep Detective or maybe Power Ballad on Friday after work. I keep hearing good things about The Sheep Detective, so I might try and catch it since it does fit this week's challenge theme as well. But tune in next week where we'll be crunching the numbers of the new Backrooms horror movie. We'll also be checking in on week 2 of The Mandalorian and Grogu. Will it drop off massively hard? Will it surprise us and have some legs? We will find out next week. But until then, have a good one, watch more movies. Bye.